This is a movie by a man called Guy Nativ, and I believe it's based on a short film. And it's about this heavily tattooed skinhead slash neo-Nazi slash whatever, who basically lives a life of drinking, partying, violence and hate crimes. But then he meets this single mother who's gotten out of that kind of life and wants to stay out too. So their lifestyles are kinda incompatible and he has to figure out how to make it work. So should he sacrifice his new relationship or his so-called family? And how is that gonna work out when the organization he's involved with isn't the kind you just leave willy-nilly? And then there's the issue of his tattoos too. His face is heavily covered and that is gonna present some problems. So the movie is basically about him trying to figure his life out. How to move on and move forward and how to deal with all the obstacles that presents. Because it's not exactly a simple, straightforward process. And it's also about his loyalties to the people that took him in as a youngster. And about him being torn between two worlds that aren't really compatible with each other. And as a whole, I'd say the story works, it's fine, but it's also not exactly mind-blowing. It didn't offer many surprises and there was a bigger issue too. I thought the pacing was really off. It just never felt like it got going. You know, like it didn't really have any momentum. It felt like it sorta staggered along. There were sequences here and there that were really gripping. But overall, this thing just failed to grab me and really hold my attention. I couldn't help but to feel like it lacked something, and I'm not really sure what it was. Because on paper this should have been a lot more compelling than it actually was. The subject matter here is interesting and the core story is fine. But for some reason I just didn't find it to be that engaging. And honestly, I was a tiny bit bored by it at certain times. And I do think a lot of that had to do with the lack of any real surprises. It's just a very predictable movie, and one of the reasons being the way they edited it. Because very early on they show something that is clearly from the end of the movie. Something that kinda spoils it, and it keeps cutting back to that from time to time too. And that just removes most of the tension and mystery about what's gonna happen. Now I guess there are a number of things that could lead to that ending. But turns out the path I thought it was gonna take was exactly the path it took. And I get it, it's based on a true story that deals with real actual people. So you kinda have to follow the story wherever it leads you, I guess. But I don't know, the whole thing really didn't work for me that well. And the more I think about it, the more I believe that the writing for his love interest was also a big issue. She's made out to be strong and independent, she refuses to get pushed around. She's left that kind of life behind and she doesn't want to do anything to endanger her kids. She's sorta in charge and dictates how it's gonna be and what's gonna happen. Well, that's how it's framed anyway, but it's not actually what happens. Because at the end of the day, if you really break it down, her character is kinda passive in the grand scheme of things. She doesn't necessarily get pushed around, but she does sorta let herself get dragged around. And I'm not really sure what kind of message that sends. Or if her arc, if you can call it that, is really one I would advocate for. Because it seems to me that she really does make quite a few bad choices in this. And to be honest, it's really the guy who dictates what's gonna happen. Even though it tries to frame it like she's the one wielding the power. And it seems like that's the message it wants to send. That's not really what it actually says though, through the events of the movie and the actions and decisions she makes. So I don't know, this one had quite a few issues, but I wouldn't call it terrible. Because it's well shot and the acting is really good for the most part. And as I said, the core story here does work, but I just didn't find it as compelling or as well paced as it could have been. But would I recommend it? Not really, but I've seen far worse too, so maybe. But you can probably skip it. Or don't. After all, I'm not your dad. But I am trying to sell out, so consider liking, subbing, hitting that bell and supporting me on Patreon. Because I really need to move to Ohio and get myself a face full of tattoos. And hey, why not drop a comment below or check out another review? I'd appreciate it. Thanks.